Clash of the Classics.
Hey everyone, that's right, I recognize that intro. It's time for Clash of the Classics, and today we're going to have some fun. I'm Donnie, I am your guide and moderator here on Horsepower for an Hour. Tom Spence is my partner in crime. He's our historian for these battles. And Ken Hale, this is where it all starts right here. Ken Hale is our classic car specialist. Ken is a member of the International Automotive Appraisers Association, as well as the National Auto Dealers Association. Now here's the thing, if you're new to our show, maybe you've just discovered us, perhaps this is your very first time, well here's what we do. Every week we roll the clock back, we pit two classic models against one another, and then we go head-to-head with styling. We look at powertrain, we look at design features, then we vote on the car that we like best, and we welcome you to join us and let us know which car you prefer. You can always go to our website or our Facebook page and chime in at any time. These battles are fueled by National Parts Depot for the finest in classic car restoration. Got to check them out anytime at npdlink.com. All right, today's going to be some fun. Today's the 1968 Rover 2000 TC battling the 1968 Volvo 123 GT. Now, I want to start with the Rover. Now, this is a pretty cool car. Spence, begin with you. Certainly unusual, that's for sure. 2000 was produced from 63 to 70, had a 2.0-liter inline four-cylinder rated at about 124 horsepower, but it was a whole lot more than that. Chassis was awesome, but this is a cool car, dude.
When I looked at it at first, I initially didn't like it. Then I kind of YouTubed it, and I looked at a few more pictures, and I started to sort of get a feel for it. After reviewing it and studying it, I absolutely love this car, a car I had never heard of.
I want to roll over with you, Ken. You have a lot of experience with these cars, as with all the cars that we talk about here on Clash of the Classics. This is not one that we see with any degree of frequency at all. This is an unusual car, but it is a cool-looking ride. Talk about it.
Yeah, it's a lot better looking in real life than it actually is in the pictures. It is a gorgeous car. The corporate designation for it is a P6. And the marketing name is Rover 2000, and then the 2000 TC. Now, the 2000 refers to a 2-liter engine. You mentioned it's inline four. It's an iron block. It's aluminum head, overhead cam. This car was a very advanced car at the time, and their emphasis when they brought this car out not only was to have something that was really a mid-price car, but could out and compete with cars like Jaguars and the smaller Mercedes-Benz, but they also had a priority on safety. They did a lot of things that Mercedes did at the time. They had belts that self-tensioned. They had crumple zones. Their chassis was a bird cage. It was basically a unibody bird cage chassis with crumple zones. It had padded dash. It had things that you just didn't see in cars at that time.
You roll in the house with this in 1968, you were styling, Spence.
And the other side, the ice alert. They came up with clever gimmicks like that could sense ice on the roads. When it came over here, I didn't realize that in some parts of the world, things like electric windows, power steering, air conditioning were unique. It was something that you had to do to a vehicle to try to sell it in the U.S.
Yeah. Not so much so in England.
Yeah, not at all.
Well, one thing I learned that this car was inspired by Citroen. In 68, actually in 68, they stopped the 2.0 and they went with the Buick V8, which I didn't know that came as
well.
A
that was an
surprise to me.
option. That was an optional engine on
The 3.5.
Yeah, the 3.5 Buick V8 was. As a matter of fact, when this car was first designed, they made a very wide engine compartment because they envisioned ultimately putting a turbine engine in this car. That was the idea. They were going to go. They thought turbine technology was the future, just kind of like Chrysler did, if you remember, back in that period of time. So they made a very wide engine compartment, and fortunately for them, the Buick fit in there very nicely there, because even the TC version, the 124 horsepower with the dual carburetors and the high performance head and all that, it still was not a fast car. But that Buick changed everything for it. But the block on this is really interesting too. On this particular engine, the heads were flat, and the chamber is actually made into the crown of the piston. And you've seen some Ford engines like that out here that we've had similar to that. And it was at the time it was a very advanced engine. As I say, it was an overhead cam engine, beautiful driving car. Four-speed transmission. And when they brought out the Buick, only the automatic was optional. But then later on, they brought out a 4-speed in that as well.
With an electronic overdrive, I believe.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
But the chassis was pretty stout on it as well.
The chassis, we'll talk about the chassis. The chassis was called a bird cage. It was a unibody chassis bolted to a frame. And all of the panels that went onto that bird cage were unstressed panels. And they got this from the Citroen DS19, and we've talked about that in the past. And what makes this so neat is if you have damage to a panel, so you just unbolt it and you take it off and you put a new one on, You don't have to cut into the chassis. You don't have to weld into the chassis. You don't have to weld new parts on. It's a very advanced way of doing things, providing you don't break up the birdcage. But it was extremely rigid chassis. If you buy one today that was moderately taken care of, you're not going to have squeaks and rattles and that type of thing. The car was built that well.
Oh, so engineered and built well. Hey, in 1968, let's roll with it.
Yeah.
In 1968, Planet of the Apes, 2001 Space Odyssey, Bullet, Night of the Living Dead, Yellow Submarine, Monterey Pop, Ice Station Zebra, all at the movies. God, was that the
Monterey
sweet
Pop.
spot? Yeah. Think of everybody who was at that concert. And the funny thing about Ice Station Zebra, when Howard Hughes was flipping out in Las Vegas, he would be in his hotel room. He owned a TV station. He used to ring them up and say, put on Ice Station Zebra. They said he did it 100 times.
Well, Ken, I couldn't find an original MSRP for this car, and I searched high and low. But what is a good number 2 car worth today?
Well, today it's worth about $15K. They're not.
Really?
It's not a real high dollar. This car also had 4-wheel disc brakes, but they were inboard like the Jaguars.
It certainly seems odd that a car that was so well engineered is only worth $15K. And how many did they make, Ken? Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea.
I would like to buy one.
Yeah.
I mean, is it a good thing to buy, or are you in deep trouble once you get one?
Well, the only problem you're going to have with that car is that you're going to find parts for it.
So you got to buy 2.
Yeah. Well,
That's the way to find parts.
yeah. In England, I think there's a lot of parts available for it, but most of the parts you probably have to go overseas for.
Well, before we go any further, I'm going to say that whether you're looking for simple replacement parts, restoration parts, performance upgrades, whatever you're looking for, NPD are the go-to guys. You got to check their catalogs for part availability. National Parts Depot makes our Clash of the Classics possible. No one knows classics better than NPD. Check them out, npdlink.com. All right, let's talk about that 1968 Volvo 123 GT. Now, by the way, and I read this before I came on air today, Spence, thought of you. Volvo in Latin means I roll. And I thought that was, so we're rolling with this Volvo.
Yeah, and if it rolls, generally it's a pretty good crash car. So it's ironic that it would be a car known for safety to be called I roll.
Well, here's another car that we don't see too much of at some of the car shows that we go to. In fact, I don't know that we've ever seen this vehicle, and we do. Well, I know in 2016 we did 56 shows, just you and I. So
With a lot of cars.
With a lot of cars, yeah. But Volvo was founded way back in 1927. Ken, they had their share of strange-looking cars. This 123, I think, is pretty cool. It looks great, and it seems to be built well. Talk about it.
Yeah, occasionally you see those around. They actually brought this car out in 1956, and they carried that all the way up through 1970 with the 123 GT. And the corporate name for that was Amazon. It was the Amazon, but they marketed it again later as a 122, and it came in 4 doors, 2 doors, and station wagons. And in 1966, I believe it is when they actually made the GT3 model, which added dual Solex carburetors and more performance. But even at that, it was still only 95 horsepower. But they introduced in the 50s seatbelts as a standard in a car, and then they ultimately went to 3-point seatbelts, the first ever standard in a car. But when you talk about real safety, this car doesn't quite meet the same standards that Rover did, even though Volvo has the name. Because
So not built anywhere near as well.
When you talk about in the 60s and crumple zones and self-tensioner belts, those kinds of things, I think the Rover was way ahead of it. This was a very solid built car, and very four coil springs. The GT, they actually brought out front disc brakes on that. Was one of the things they offered on that, and they had Recaro seats. And they also had the tachometer, and they had a few other goodies that came with the car that kind of singled it out. Well, the 122 sedans, the 4 doors and station wagons were discontinued in '67. Only the 2-door GT3 continued up through the '70s.
Well, you're correct. It was more of a sports car than a lot of folks give it credit for. As I did some research with this, you were right. The Recaro seats, Pirelli tires, 4-speed manual trans. But here's the thing, and before we run out of time, Volvo was supposed to, and I'm not sure if my information is correct, but from what I've learned, Volvo was supposed to exceed 5,000 units for this car, but now it's believed that only about 1,500 of these cars are left in existence that were built during the 67 and 1968 years. This car originally sold for $2,655. Because it's so rare, does that increase the value on this one?
Well, this car is going to be about 20K. It's going to be about 5.
It's a little more than the
Rover. Yeah, it's quite a bit more. It's 33% more if you look at it. It's they when he stopped building the 122 and he continued with this, that's when they brought out the 140 series, and that's what most people see now, the square Volvos, the real square boxes, and ultimately, then they came out with the 240 version of that. And I think we talked on the air about, that's kind of become kind of a cult car for the rich and famous up in Seattle.
Spence, which one do you like?
Well, before we close, because Planet of the Apes came out and Ken looks a lot like Charlton Heston, I would like him to say, "Take your stinking hands off me, you dirty ape." Did you just say that for me?
Yeah, take your, what?
Yeah, good enough. He passes the screen test. I hate to say it, but I drove a Volvo. I love the Volvo, but I'm with the Rover. Even though I'm taking like a $6,000 haircut on this one, I like the Rover more.
Ken, which one do you like?
Oh, give me the Rover. I'd love to have one of those.
Okay, I guess I'm the odd man out yet once again. I like that Volvo, just something about the way it looks, and I like the fact that it's worth more money. But here's the thing, folks. You can always go to our Facebook page or chime in now on our YouTube channel or on our website or even the app and let us know which car you like best. But if you've got a classic ride, you're in the middle of a classic build, just considering getting into classic car restoration, here's what you have to do. You got to check them out at npdlink.com. It's National Parts Depot. If you got a classic car need, any sort of a restoration product that you're looking for, NPD Link are going to be the guys that have it. We got a bunch more coming up. We'll check in with the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, and we're going to talk about the 12 best truck engines of all time. You don't want to miss that. Stay in your seats. We'll be right back. We are your ultimate stop in automotive radio. We are Horsepower for now.